Hey there, friends, and welcome back to another 3-Minute Thoughts. My name is Derek, and in the next 3 minutes, we're going to jump into the book of Judges and look at Judges chapters 1 and 2. But before we jump into the book, let's take a look at some of the time period and history of the book of Judges. The time period that this book covers is the time period between Joshua's death and the rise of Israel's first king, which would be Saul. So somewhere around it spans about 350 years, roughly, give or take, throughout their history. The purpose of the book is that Judges explains why Israel needed a king, or at least so they thought, right? The book records Israel's repeated cycle of sin and deliverance, showing what happens when God's people reject his leadership. The key verse that summarizes this entire era is chapter 21, verse 25. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. There's no real author that's attributed to this book, but a lot of historical authors and studies will attribute this to Samuel as the last judge. But there's no writing in here where someone actually claims ownership of the book. All right, so let's take a look at chapters 1 and 2, where we deal with Israel's half-hearted obedience and then this cycle of rebellion that pops up throughout this entire book. Chapter 1 picks up where the book of Joshua leaves off. Israel is in the promised land, but the conquest is not complete. Judah and Simeon are leading the charge, successfully defeating enemies, and even capturing the king, Adoni-Bezek, who admits that God is repaying him for his own cruelty. Caleb, now an old warrior, continues fighting, and his nephew, Othniel, emerges as a leader. But the rest of the tribes fail to drive out the Canaanites completely. Instead, they allow them to stay, sometimes forcing them into labor, but ultimately compromising God's command to remove idolatry from the land. This partial obedience leads to a long-term set of consequences. Which brings us into chapter 2, which is going to set the stage for the entire book. An angel of the Lord appears, rebuking Israel for breaking their covenant. Because of their disobedience, God declares he will no longer drive out their enemies. They will remain as a test and a thorn in Israel's side. After Joshua and his generation die, a new generation arises who did not know the Lord or work that he had done for them. So this is meaning that they're going to quickly turn to the idols of Canaanites, abandoning God, which is why God wanted them to get rid of the Canaanites from the land in the first place. All right, so this is going to lead us to the famous, what we call the Judges cycle. Rebellion, where Israel turns away from God. Oppression, God allows the enemy nations to afflict them. Repentance, Israel cries out to God for help. And deliverance, God raises up a judge to rescue them. These chapters remind us that partial obedience is still disobedience. That's it for today. Be well, friends.